Welcome, welcome to the Hard Skills Show, where we discuss how to develop the nuanced hard skills, meaning the most challenging soft skills needed to make a real impact through your leadership. I'm your host, Dr. Mira Brancu. I am a leadership consulting and coaching psychologist, founder of the TowerScope Leadership Academy, an associate professor, a Psychology Today columnist, and author of the Millennials Guide to Workplace Politics. And I had my own leadership career before transitioning to helping teams and high-achieving women navigate their leadership complexities. So thank you for joining us today on our journey. As a reminder, we're in season 4, where we're focused on navigating complexity, and developing your personal and organizational resilience is a big one for navigating today's complexities. And that is a topic of today's show. Now, if some of you have been tracking, in season 3, episode 36, which was posted on April 16th, you might recall we talked with a clinical and business psychologist, Dr. Marie-Hélène Pelletier, about her resilience plan framework for developing your individual resilience. Today, we're going to take another perspective into what it takes to create a healthy psychological culture to promote mental health and well-being with Dr. Ken Nowack. Now, before I introduce you to our guest today, if you haven't yet checked out my newest free resources for saying no, setting boundaries, and overcoming self-sabotaging beliefs rooted in negative societal messages, you got to check them out. You can listen to my client Q&A episode 40, posted on May 14th, to get that context. And if you're interested, you can find the associated resources at gotowerscope.com/resources and click on the other free resources. All right. Now, with no further ado, I am super excited to introduce our special guest today, Dr. Ken Nowack. Dr. Nowack is a licensed psychologist and senior research officer of Invisia Learning, Inc. His PhD is in counseling psychology from UCLA, and he has published extensively in the areas of 360-degree feedback assessment, health psychology, and behavioral medicine. Ken is a member of the Daniel Goleman's Consortium for Research on Emotional Intelligence in Organizations, and serves as the outgoing editor of the APA Consulting Psychology Journal. If some of you know my background, I was associate editor when he served as editor, and I do see him as a mentor. So I'm also excited that I get to talk with him even more today, even though we both stepped down. He is also fellow of the American Psychological Association, Division 13 specifically, which is the Society of Consulting Psychology. We're both members. His published books include From Insight to Improvement, Leveraging 360-Degree Feedback, Clueless, which is another good book, Coaching People Who Just Don't Get It. I love that title. And he is working on a new book, Performance Feedback Strategies, Driving Successful Behavior Change, and many, many other endeavors. He writes a lot. So make sure to follow him if you haven't. And are you ready? Let's get started. Get out your pens. I definitely have my pen and paper ready. If you are not the pen and paper kind, take out your device, be ready to take notes that way, reflect deeply, and identify at least one small step to further develop your hard skills muscle based on what we learned today. Welcome, and great to have you on the show, Ken.
Well, thank you. I really appreciate the wonderful introduction, and I'm probably more in awe of you than vice versa. So it was great working with you on the journal, and I think I cried and told my wife when you told me you needed to step down that I don't know what I'm going to do, but great to be on your show, and love this topic as well. So thank you for having me.
The feeling is mutual. I'm glad I left before you left. Okay. So tell me, what got you interested in the topic of resilience? How did you get here?
Yeah, it's really a personal story that I think I've shared a little bit with you in the past, but this has been a topic that I have been really, really fascinated with probably since I was even before high school. And it was really the theme of who are the hardy? Who are individuals that go through life crisis, challenge, adversity, and whatever could occur and come out the back end and basically are fairly sturdy. They're fairly strong in terms of mental health and physical well-being. And the impetus really comes from my father's story. I'll be brief about it, but when my dad was 8 years old, he was actually woken up by his mom and dad in a little town in East Berlin called Erkner. And he was told that he needed to immediately get dressed and he wouldn't be able to take anything with him, but they were going to put him on a train, walked him to the train station, and that was the last he saw of his parents and most of his family again. And his journey took him to France. And when he was there, there was an organization that still exists today, much like UNICEF, called OSE, O-S-E. My French is terrible, so I won't try to pronounce it, that really looked after a small group of stranger kids. They were all German adolescents, from my father being one of the youngest at 8 to I think 15 or 16. And they were hidden, can you imagine, for 3 years in tiny farmhouses and were moved quite frequently, almost monthly, to avoid obviously Nazi capture. And my father was told immediately, German's not going to be really great to use. So if you can, whisper, and better yet, see if he could learn a new language called French. And he recalled his days actually just in ambiguity, not knowing what became of his parents, his family, his friends. Feeling each day was kind of a day of just looking for food. He remembers feeling hunger just about every day that he was out there. And he was one of the very, very fortunate ones that had no sponsor in the United States, but an organization that was able to ship some, but not all of the young adolescents, boys and girls, to different places in the world. And my father wound up coming to the United States through Ellis Island on a long boat ride or a couple of boat rides, and was shunted from there to an orphanage in San Francisco. And he's now about 11 and a half and told once again, hey, try to learn another language. Try to learn a little bit because you haven't had much education or schooling for a long period of time. And you're safe now. There's no social support per se, but the orphanage is your new family and your new home. And my father stayed in touch with quite a number of adolescents that were in the orphanage. Not all of them had the same experience he did, but all of them came from pretty tough childhoods. And to the day he passed away, they remained intimate friends. And it was interesting for me to watch these individuals, and some were incredibly hardy physically and psychologically, and others really had some scars and long trail of harm that psychologically hurt them. Today they passed away as well. So it really got me on the journey of thinking about what's unique about my father and his experience that many, many other children, and today we look globally with the geopolitical issues around the globe of similar kinds of experiences, but what kind of potential damage can it do? So that was the early impetus for me to really try to study this topic. Even my doctoral dissertation many, many moons ago was really focused on executive burnout and why some senior leaders with, you'd think, all the resources in the world would fare really well, and others would just break down. So a long-winded story to share with you more of a personal history of what it is about my father's experience. There was two good pieces of news that came out of that I'll share with your audience. One is that was a place that my father met my mother. And my mom didn't have the identical upbringing, but she was a single parent. Her mother couldn't take care of her during the war, placed her in the orphanage, stayed in touch with her. And my father and my mother fell in love when they were very young. And the moment
Wow.
they could leave the orphanage, decided to get married and had nothing, but that love kept them together. And the other was, I'll just finish the story, a company that came to the orphanage when my father was about 17 and offered every child that wanted to do some work an opportunity to work for an organization. And my father was kind of wondering what the catch was, but there really was no catch. They said, if you work hard, keep your nose clean, we promise you, old career paradigm here, that you can work until the day you want to retire. And 36 years later, my father left Levi Strauss, an incredibly benevolent and caring company, and probably never looked for another job. So two good pieces of my dad's journey that were uplifting and pretty positive that came out of his childhood experiences.
Wow. What an unbelievable story. I have a million thoughts. I mean, it does remind me of the research that I did back when I did research on veterans with
Yeah.
PTSD, right? And we were facing the same questions. How can you have the same experiences during deployment and exposed to similar kinds of traumatic experiences, but have different trajectories in terms of hardiness or resilience versus developing post-traumatic stress disorder or other complications and other physical comorbidities and things like that in addition. And it's been the major question, I think, for lots of our human condition situations, right?
Yeah, we're incredibly hardy. And I think as we've looked, particularly post-COVID, this label resilience has been bantered about, and it seems like everyone's talking about it and writing about it. And there's certainly a little bit of a myth that it's only defined as a set of individual traits and qualities and factors, be it genetic, be it environmental, be it lifestyle practices that really shape. But at the end of the day, when we look at this topic of resilience, we've got to kind of put it in the context of a model that there has to be a stressor. It could be minor, it could be major, it could be multiple adversities that we face. But that's the trigger for anybody that's trying to write about or define this concept of resilience. And from that, we can then look at kind of the individual, him or herself, in terms of their genetic makeup, their predisposition, even some cool research around what's called epigenetics. Would my father's experience cause some chromosomal DNA damage that perhaps I might pass down or be passed down in another generation? And certainly our environmental factors, be it our socioeconomic status, what we face on a day-to-day basis in terms of perceived unfairness, incivility, discrimination, institutional racism, or any isms, and certainly our social environment, who we hang around with, our life partners, our family members, our community that could provide us that insulation. So it's all in the context, I think, of a model of resilience. But I really want to spend just a second, Mira, if I could, kind of dispelling one of the popular myths that 100% of all of us bounce back from adversity and challenge. And there's certainly some pretty established research evidence that really does suggest there are some people that are pretty impervious. As they say, things happen and they don't suffer. They don't really have some bona fide classified diagnostic mental illness and disorders. They're just pretty steady. Things roll off their back. And this is often the euphemism of what the popular press is called a resilient individual. And I happen to label this or relabel this hardiness. These are people that just don't have much of a pivot point up or down in terms of moods, emotion, physiology, no matter what sort of seems to strike them. But that seems to be a large proportion of individuals that we might popularly refer to as resilient. But there's a lot of other trajectories as well that are important, I think, for the listeners to really think about. And one of those I would characterize as a trajectory of harm. So we know that some life events, be it physical, sexual abuse, school shootings, to use an example, they have a long trail. They leave a long mark. And in your research and work within the military infrastructure, the popularity of post-traumatic stress syndrome is one that sometimes is very difficult to eradicate or to mute. And excitingly today, some of the new research around psychedelics seems to be at least another modality we have for addressing that. So harm is something that folks don't rebound from. The good news is it's not a majority of individuals that will experience those kind of life events. And again, the modal and the normative response will be people that will recover back to kind of a baseline area. We're pretty resilient. We're pretty adaptable as human beings, whether it's loss of a loved one, a divorce from a life partner, losing one's job, and other kinds of things that occur that can be disappointing. Even the diagnosis of a chronic illness or an acute illness, such as cancer or a heart disease issue that we have to deal with. So I want to just be really clear that there are some multiple and different trajectories around this word resilience that are really important for listeners to understand.
Absolutely. Yeah. And we are nearing an ad break.
Okay, great.
When we come back from the ad break, I'd love to hear a little bit more about, is there a difference between hardiness and resilience? That's one question I had. And then continuing down this path of what causes different kinds of trajectories. So let's talk about that when we come back. You are listening to The Hard Skills with me, Dr. Mira Brancu, and our guest, Dr. Ken Nowack. We air on Tuesdays at 5 p.m. Eastern. If you would like to join our online audience and ask questions right now of us, we can answer in real time. You can find us on LinkedIn or YouTube at TalkRadio.nyc, and we'll be right back with our guest in just a moment.
Are you a conscious co-creator? Are you on a quest to raise your vibration and your consciousness? I'm Sam Leibowitz, your conscious consultant, and on my show, The Conscious Consultant Hour, Awakening Humanity, we will touch upon all these topics and more. Listen live at our new time on Thursdays at 12 noon Eastern Time. That's The Conscious Consultant Hour, Awakening Humanity, Thursdays 12 noon on TalkRadio.nyc.
Are you a high-achieving, growth-oriented leader? Are you interested in developing your authentic leadership while creating a healthy, inclusive workplace? Hi, I'm Dr. Mira Brancu, host of The Hard Skills on TalkRadio.nyc at 5 p.m. Eastern on Tuesdays, where we discuss how leaders develop the hard skills needed to make a greater impact. We interview experts, have live coaching, and tackle these challenges. Listen to The Hard Skills on Tuesday at 5 p.m. Eastern on TalkRadio.nyc.
Are you a business owner? Do you want to be a business owner? Do you work with business owners? Hi, I'm Stephen Fry, your small and medium-sized business or SMB guy, and I'm the host of the new show, Always Friday. While I love to have fun on my show, we take those Friday feelings of freedom and clarity to discuss popular topics on the minds of SMBs today. Please join me and my various special guests on Friday at 11 a.m. on TalkRadio.nyc.
You're listening to Talk Radio NYC. Uplift, educate, empower.
Welcome back with me, Dr. Mira Brancu, and The Hard Skills, and our guest today, Dr. Ken Nowack. So we've been talking about resilience and a couple of sort of points to make here. Number one, you have to have the existence of a stressor, he says, right? In order to know what your resilience is or your trajectory is, you have to have the presence of a stressor. From that point forward, though, a lot depends on individual disposition, including epigenetics, environmental factors, and social factors, right? And so we started talking about what are those factors. And I love the reassurance he gave us, which is true because I learned the same thing when I was doing research on in PTSD of veterans. Like 75% of people have a positive trajectory of not developing, any long-term adversive effects from most situations. There are some situations that kind of lend themselves because of the level of harm or adversity or length of time or multiple experiences over time, which we'll get into. But the majority of people end up being fairly hardy and resilient, which I think is very reassuring just to think about that we can go through a lot as humans. It's scary, but we can come out of it in most things okay. But there are factors that can impact some of us, and that's really important to know. So before we get into those, though, you started using hardiness and resiliency, and I started wondering, is there a difference? Do you see a difference in terms of definition or what they mean?
Yeah, and I refer to those that are fairly stable, don't really react. There's not a wide gap between an event, a trigger, if you will, and a big change in mental health, well-being, mood, behavior. as kind of a hardy individual. So it's my label of, I think, what the popular press has really talked about is everyone rebounds and they're resilient. And this is some of the confusion, I think, as we read popular articles or listen to people speak, is I really want to pin people down and define what do you mean by this label resilient? And I've been referring to resilience more as an outcome. What is your state at any point in time that we can measure again psychologically, physically, physiologically? And that's probably the most widely accepted way of defining resilience is to look at the terminal follow-up of something's happened in your life, at work, away from work, and how are you faring? But we could just as easily define resilience as a set of individual factors, and that seems to be the most popular non-academic way of looking at resilience. If you'd only practice mindfulness meditation, if you'd work out, if you're connected socially, if you sleep well, if you eat heart healthy, gosh, the magic here is that it'll mitigate and really minimize the stress response. All true, but that's looking at resilience from a very different lens, which is individual factors that impact the impact of an event on the mind body. And we could also finally look at resilience as a process. So one of the reasons I think humans are so adaptable is a model that is well known, but I've kind of tailored and customized is looking at how do we lead leaders and employees through work and life changes and view resilience as a lens around a process that really contains 3 steps. And the first is, do you understand what's going on? And that's where we may seek some counseling, some support, even some therapy, find a mentor, a coach, a life partner, or a community to get feedback and really understand what is happening at a behavioral, emotional, physical level. And the second stage is developing skills for dealing with that, coping. And this is where all the lifestyle practices and things that are quite popular today, we can embed into our daily routine, what we say to ourselves, giving gratitude, practicing forgiveness, all the things that make sense from a heart healthy and from a longevity perspective. And finally, I didn't mention another trajectory that you're well aware of. It's the opposite of post-traumatic stress, and psychologists and researchers call it post-traumatic growth. And I actually have some of my own research working with the autoimmune group that has multiple sclerosis, and about a 7-year program we've been running for 12 weeks with newly diagnosed individuals. We find a pretty large percent would never vote and sign up to get MS, multiple sclerosis, but they actually grow through the disease. It's not going to kill them, most likely, and not many of them, but it's a lifelong, debilitating, unpredictable snowflake disorder that can really interfere with the quality and independence of life. But a large percentage can work on themselves and walking through this process grow, and they redefine who's important in life, what's important in life, and puts life in a different frame that's more meaningful. So this jingle jangle around the topic of resilience is also quite interesting to me, and I'm as confused as others when I'm reading an article or listening to people speak of what do you mean by this particular label?
Yeah, I really like the thinking about it in different ways, but especially recognizing that, yes, it could be an individual sort of outcome or, hardiness is more about like, stable factors, but there is an aspect of it that where you can develop and grow, and you can have post-traumatic growth. You can sort of develop skills over time. There are opportunities that we have so that we don't feel like we're stuck and this is going to be it.
Yeah, and one other point I'd raise too is these trajectories might differ for any individual with different kinds of events and situations. So perhaps divorcing a life partner may be for some quite freeing and independent. Anticipating death of a loved one, kind of anticipatory grief, has a different journey as well. Sudden events may again trigger a different trajectory. So we're not stuck with just one, and not all work-life events and challenges that we have. We're on the same course. We're on the same path. So I think intuitively we realize that. But again, I think there's a lot of popular press that we're sort of doomed to follow whatever our predisposition is. And there's not a lot of clinical and research evidence to support that.
Yeah. And I think I really like when you were talking about kind of a few steps that help even leaders who are going through the process of trying to become more resilient. And the first is, do you understand what's going on? And I'll put another name to it, is meaning making. That is massive. I think what people don't realize is, as you were describing, like the experience of divorce and how different people take different meaning from it, and based on what's happened, that when we were doing research in post-traumatic, PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, when I was talking with different patients, it wasn't always, in fact, it was rarely the actual event that affected them deeply. It was what happened immediately before or immediately after that caused them to take a specific meaning from it. Like, I wish I had done this and I didn't, and now I'll always regret it. I'll never forget it. I'll always feel angry about it. I wish I could undo this. I wish that person hadn't, so there was pieces about the experience around the event that when you take certain meaning from it, it translates into certain outcomes. And it could be positive outcomes or it could be negative outcomes. But the meaning making, you can revisit and you can explore and extract more meaning from what happened. And that can change how you might view a certain situation. And that's just, a very brief intervention in a very specific way. But I think there's an important piece of that meaning making. And I go back to even the experience your dad has. And I keep wondering about the meaning that he extracted from it. I was thinking about Viktor Franklin's Man's Search for Meaning when you were describing your father's experience, and that meaning for humans is such an important aspect.
Well, even building on that, Mira, I think, again, as we're getting close to those of us that follow the Olympic Games coming up in Paris, be pretty cool to go there. Although my wife Denise was like, no, not a good time to travel to Paris, even though we love the city. But in 1992, there was this really cool study that looked at medal winners in the Olympics. And what they found is bronze medal winners were actually happier, dramatically happier than silver medal winners. So how we look at things, to just win a medal, right? To be the elite of the elite brought tremendous satisfaction, but to not quite make it is a redefinition of how we view the lenses of being competitive and what we do in life. So just that small example of Olympic Games is a pretty good illustration that our attributions to successes and failure can really shape how it impacts our mind body.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So based on that, we're reaching another ad break, and I am curious to learn a little bit more about how we can mitigate trajectories that might, in one point in time, cause more harm or damage or adversity versus not. Can we mitigate, and or how do we as individuals and then also as organizations kind of move into this kind of development of resiliency over time? What does it take? So we're nearing an ad break. We'll learn all about that when we come back. You're listening to The Hard Skills with me, Dr. Mira Brancu, and our guest, Dr. Ken Nowack, and we'll be right back in just a moment.
Hey everybody, it's Tommy D, the Nonprofit Sector Connector, coming at you from my attic. Each week here on TalkRadio.nyc, I host a program, Philanthropy in Focus. Nonprofits impact us each and every day, and it's my focus to help them amplify their message and tell their story. Listen each week at 10 a.m. Eastern Standard Time until 11 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, right here on TalkRadio.nyc.
Were you an essential worker during the pandemic? If you needed to learn stages of epilepsy, did you depend on advocates? Did you use new innovations to cope with mental and neurological issues? Maintaining high quality of life and keeping good mental health are what we all strive for. I'm Frank R. Harrison, host of Frank About Health, and each week top healthcare influencers, professionals, and innovators answer these questions and more. Stay tuned on Thursdays at 5 p.m. on TalkRadio.nyc, and I will continue to be frank about health with all of you.
Are you a business owner? Do you want to be a business owner? Do you work with business owners? Hi, I'm Stephen Fry, your small and medium-sized business or SMB guy, and I'm the host of the new show, Always Friday. While I love to have fun on my show, we take those Friday feelings of freedom and clarity to discuss popular topics on the minds of SMBs today. Please join me and my various special guests on Friday at 11 a.m. on TalkRadio.nyc.
You're listening to Talk Radio NYC at www.talkradio.nyc. Now broadcasting 24 hours a day.
Welcome back to the Hard Skills with me, Dr. Mira Brancu, and our guest, Dr. Ken Nowack. All right, after all of this talk about different trajectories, about resiliency, I'm sure at this point people are dying to know, how do I up my game with resiliency? How do I become more resilient at work? How do I help my organization become a more resilient organization? And Ken, you study this all the time, so I'm especially curious about evidence-based practices, behaviors, things like that.
Yeah, I love this because Nike, the company, the apparel company, shoe company, has a wonderful slogan. So if I were to suggest that some of the strongest predictors of resilience and long-term health and well-being are things like getting adequate rest and sleep, eating well, physically working out, socially connecting, we'd all nod and say, oh gosh, every article, everyone I hear pontificates on just, practice mindfulness meditation. And that's a way of reversing the sympathetic nervous system and really helping us to take our foot off the brake, doing things like detaching and then recharging our batteries emotionally, physically, spiritually. We'd all nod. We'd all say, yep, that makes sense. And the hard truth is getting started is something we talk a lot about. Intentions are actually terrible predictors of long-term successful behavior change. And if I were to ask everyone listening today to take out that pen or pencil that Mira mentioned and write your signature, your name with your non-dominant hand, and just feel what that's like. For most of us, unless you're ambidextrous, takes a long time. We have to think, we have to concentrate. And the output of that is probably for a lot of us, as my colleagues in the UK, my employees there say, it's just rubbish. The quality is not really good. But if I can get you to do that 8 or 9 times in a row, and I could peer into your brain using the most sophisticated scans or transcranial magnetic imagery, we'd actually begin to see neurons starting to fire and wire together. Doesn't mean you're any good at signing your name with your non-dominant hand. But if I could get you to do that on average every day for about 60 to 90 days, you would begin to develop automaticity and a comfortability with doing it. So the biggest issue with resilience is not knowing what to do. It's helping all of us to create habits that will help sustain 3 things. One is sort of down-regulating the stress, fight, or flight response, all the things I've mentioned, kind of up-regulating, if you will, things that give us pleasure. And the mesostriatal reward system is one that if we have a great social interaction with a friend, a colleague, a family member, we know what it feels like. If we experience paying forward and just doing something that's kind, it makes us feel really great. And that sort of holds on for a while. And then there's things we can do that sort of mute what's called the default mode network. And these are things probably like meditation that don't actually decrease, it actually increases the default mode network, but there's a whole host of things we can do. So again, long-windedly, it's not about telling you what to do, it's getting you to start something and do it long and hard enough until it becomes automatic, kind of a habit.
Let's take each of these separately, just so that people can imagine what it's like to do this. Let's take down regulating first, or autonomic negative responses, right? First of all, what are we looking for? What are the symptoms that we need to sort of target them? And then what does it look like to consistently practice down regulating for 60 to 90 days?
Yeah, so one example is, and this is something if you're a leader or anybody in an organization can try to do, is identifying what people have a passion to do and what they enjoy doing, that purpose and meaning for them. And Marty Seligman at the University of Pennsylvania has some really cool peer-reviewed articles on what he calls identifying and deploying your signature strengths. It's just reaching out and say, hey, Meryl, what do you enjoy doing? What can you do at work that's more meaningful? And importantly, when you create those boundaries of heading away from work and hopefully turning off the electronic devices that we're tethered to in the evening, on weekends, on holidays. But the more we practice and put into place things we enjoy, the little things tend to be muted. We deaccelerate. We're more rapidly diffusing those stressful situations. And out of all stressors, you probably know too that interpersonal conflict, interpersonal stress causes the fight or flight or cortisol response to actually explode about 50% more than non-interpersonal types of interactions. And it takes about 50% longer to go back to baseline. So we could try to create a habit, a ritual, if you will, weekly or on a daily or weekend basis to do things that we really get off on, we really enjoy, as a way of mitigating the battery being discharged during the week.
So if I'm hearing correctly, what you're actually saying is that we should be pairing every single time the down regulation with the upregulation of engaging, leaning into pleasureful, positive experiences should be always paired with the down regulation of trying to respond to the negative reactions. Is that right?
Well, that would be the ideal. I have a hard time getting people to do any one thing over any period of time, but if we could engineer, facilitating a greater social climate and environment, and some of us will do that through spirituality or religious affinity or a community that we're involved in. And others, again, will just find activities that we find individually or in small groups and teams really fulfilling. So those kind of upregulate the positive and all the things we've read about: eat well, exercise, etc., practice breathing. Those down-regulate the parasympathetic network. So again, if I could add one more thing, actually, I would vote for sleep. I'm learning, I've researched a lot of area of this particular impairment, what I call the living drunks that are out there with presenteeism, whether it's online and listening to a show like we're doing today, or you're live and in person with another human being, that we often bring our bodies to work, but our mind, our spirit, our energy really isn't there. So if we can get you to do more than one thing, that would be great. But like I say, the challenge is doing one thing, doing it well. And as Nike keeps saying, just do it. Keep it up.
Yeah. As somebody who used to do sleep psychology, I'm obsessed. Not only am I obsessed with sleep and everybody getting sleep, including me, and you not bothering me when I'm trying to get to sleep, but we instilled it in our kids. Like, we were obsessed with them getting sleep. And at this point, they're probably one of the only adolescents in their high school that actually go to sleep at 10 and want to, and get up at a reasonable hour. Like at 7 or 8 in the morning instead of in the middle of the afternoon. And it's probably because we were obsessed. But I think there's a correlation there between, their kind of mental health and resiliency, stability, and the fact that they actually get good sleep as compared to many kids their age. So anyway, you're speaking to the choir. I'm just saying, you're speaking to the choir about sleep.
And I know it's not a sleep show, but lack of sleep not only causes chronic inflammatory responses, which is the mediation between health and well-being and poor sleep, but we also know it impairs interpersonal functioning. So I have one of the silliest peer-reviewed academic articles that was published that looked at 104 senior leaders, and we use a subjective measure of quality and quantity of sleep but we use an objective measure of interpersonal competence and 360-degree feedback tools rated by direct reports and one's boss. And we told the obvious. We found the obvious that when we're sleep deprived, we're cranky. We lack social and emotional intelligence. So it's a big area that, again, you and I can't really go into people's bedrooms at night and do much to impair it. But interestingly, it's becoming one of the most predictive, resilience factors that we should all tune into.
Absolutely. It also affects weight gain. And for women, by the way, it's related to decreased menopause outcomes and symptoms. So just saying, it's the answer to everything.
Maybe we'll do a sleep show in the future.
Yeah, right. Now, the way that you were describing this pairing of downregulation and upregulation with positive experiences, the ideal, reminds me actually of a coaching call I had recently where somebody was sharing with me how a strength of hers was that she can be incredibly intensively focused when she needs to do what most of us would consider to be very arduous, exhausting writing work. And on the days that she has set an intention to do that work, if she gets any interruptions whatsoever, she becomes irritable and she snaps and she feels bad because it's not aligned to her value of being a kind person. And so we started exploring how can you lean into the strength that you bring on the days that you want to be really engaged in the work that you do without allowing yourself to be interrupted in that way that throws you off and makes you not be the best person that you can be on that day. And so for her, it was about separating and not allowing herself to respond on days when she was so engaged in the thing that she was into that it would take her off her game. And it's a matter of separating some of these habits. And these habits have become so ingrained. It's like, checking her email or responding when somebody knocks on the door, or, you feel like we need to be responsive all the time. But sometimes we have to really reevaluate our habits and determine, are these still serving me well, or who are they serving? And if they're not serving me well, is there a way to separate or repair or these kinds of things, right?
Yeah, two thoughts. One is, I think what you're describing is a little bit of what's been talked about called flow, that we're in that particular line of just feeling as if we're enjoying what we're doing. We're tuning out the environment. It's not a lot of effort, but when we're interrupted, it disrupts that flow that we're in. And the other comes from research from Teresa Amabil and her colleague at Harvard that did a really interesting diary study a few years ago, asking employees what constitutes the best day at work. And the significant finding was that when people reported making progress, whatever was on their plate, they rated it a great day. So when we get hijacked and things occur that interrupt our ability to get things done, lack of resources, interpersonal kinds of conflicts, whatever it is that hijacks our day, we report subjectively that this was less satisfying. So I think you're kind of describing two aspects that are quite fascinating.
Absolutely. Yeah. So we're reaching another ad break. You're listening to The Hard Skills with me, Dr. Mira Brancu, and our guest, Dr. Ken Nowack. When we return, Ken, I would really like to take this now to a much higher level, which is the organizational level. How do leaders take these concepts, but then create healthy, psychologically, positive workplaces with positive, healthy mental health and well-being? We're going to explore that when we come back. We'll be right back in just a moment. Are you a high-achieving, growth-oriented leader? Are you interested in developing your authentic leadership while creating a healthy, inclusive workplace? Hi, I'm Dr. Mira Brancu, host of The Hard Skills on TalkRadio.nyc at 5 p.m. Eastern on Tuesdays, where we discuss how leaders develop the hard skills needed to make a greater impact. We interview experts, have live coaching, and tackle these challenges. Listen to The Hard Skills on Tuesday at 5 p.m. Eastern on TalkRadio.nyc.
Hey everybody, it's Tommy D, the nonprofit sector connector, coming at you from my attic. Each week here on TalkRadio.nyc, I host a program, Philanthropy in Focus. Nonprofits impact us each and every day, and it's my focus to help them amplify their message and tell their story. Listen each week at 10 a.m. Eastern Standard Time until 11 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, right here on TalkRadio.nyc.
Are you a conscious co-creator? Are you on a quest to raise your vibration and your consciousness? I'm Sam Leibowitz, your conscious consultant, and on my show, The Conscious Consultant Hour, Awakening Humanity, we will touch upon all these topics and more. Listen live at our new time on Thursdays at 12 noon Eastern Time. That's The Conscious Consultant Hour, Awakening Humanity, Thursdays 12 noon on TalkRadio.nyc.
You're listening to Talk Radio NYC at www.talkradio.nyc. Now broadcasting 24 hours a day.
Welcome back to the Hard Skills with me, Dr. Mira Brancu, and our guest today, Dr. Ken Nowack. We have been talking a lot about resiliency, but especially at the individual level and different trajectories and how we can mitigate some of the impact of highly stressful and adverse experiences and come out stronger and stronger over time. And a lot of that has to do with setting habits. And I love that Ken said 60 to 90 days, because there's some top psychology stuff out there, folks, that say 21 days. The research shows that it's an average of 60-ish to 90-ish days. So don't get frustrated after 21 days, the thing doesn't stick. Just keep holding on to it for 2 to 3 months, okay? But it's probably not that easy when it comes to the organizational level, right? It's not just one person you want to see, developing strong resilience and mental health and well-being. It's an entire organization. What do leaders do then when they want to focus on this, Ken?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think there's so much, again, pointed to what individual coping and managing can do. And obviously, if we're not well, whatever that might mean in a mental, physical state, we're looking at techniques and strategies individually for recovering and detaching, and really pairing those two together to overcome the ill-being that we have. All the things that we've read about and talked about are more preventive, of course, like lifestyle practices. And we could move into that area of flourishing, doing things to promote well-being at an individual level. But we find that organizational stressors and organizational policies, procedures, toxic leaders tend to contribute, obviously, to a climate where people aren't flourishing, they're not doing well. And the top three kind of drivers, if you will, that should be monitored and tracked and explored by organizations are workload, just what's on our plate. And I think all of us can relate to the changes in careering, the boundaries, the definition of work since COVID that's magnified and accelerated. But there isn't anyone I speak to today that says, I don't have enough to do. So it seems like we're all a little bit overwhelmed. And secondly, it's the autonomy and independence that we have when we provide a human driver of enabling all of us to have more decisional control, more independence. It's one of those things we find in a lot of theories on work and satisfaction and well-being really can be beneficial. So the more leaders don't micromanage, the more they will actually participatively lead and don't use a fall participative style of asking people's input when your mind's already made up. Empowering people to make decisions goes a long way of creating a climate where people can flourish. And finally, relationships, the interpersonal interactions that occur. Great leaders build great teams. And I wish more measurement and evaluation of leadership had to do with the effectiveness and the output of the teams that folks manage at a leadership level. And far too often, I think we look at individual leadership skills and abilities. Nothing wrong with that, but the metrics that I really think are critical if you want to build a climate and culture of well-being is to look at the functioning of teams. So at an organizational level, I know there's been a lot of research saying that most wellness programs may not have quite the payoff and return on investment. But again, I target more of what leadership practices are all about. There's an organization, international organization called UKG that did a really interesting survey that found that 69% of employees said that their interaction with their manager is equal to or even more important than interactions with family, friends, life partner. So toxic leaders and leadership practices is a key area that we like to focus in our research and practice to say at the end of the day, we can address what leaders do. We can address who gets promoted, what the succession looks like, and how do we onboard and reinforce not just technical knowledge and experience, but equally weight the interpersonal competence, the emotional, social competence of those in leadership and project management roles.
Yeah, that's really powerful. The research that I'm thinking about when you describe that is research that was done, I forgot now by whom, but it was, again, in the world of trauma. If you have just one person in your life who cared about you during that time, that the traumatic event or events or series of experiences happen, you have a better trajectory in terms of your outcome. Just one, all it takes is one person. Now imagine if that one person is your boss or a caretaker.
Yeah.
Right? That's the power. I don't think that people realize, like you were saying, the impact of one manager can make a difference on an entire team of people. And if every manager can do that, the impact that it has on the organization. So if you could change one thing, it would be helping managers become better team leaders and recognize the power of their effect on other people.
Well, research from Gallup, they have a proprietary engagement survey called the Gallup Q12. And one of the kind of interesting but maybe odd items they ask is, do you have a best friend at work? And I don't think I go to work looking for a best friend, but that connection, that sense of belonging, that being treated in a civil and fair and unbiased manner goes a long way of staying healthy, particularly when workload is high and resources are low. And I'm the only one holding down the fort. So I think your point is a really good one, that we're wired as social creatures. And when we're lonely and alone, it's detrimental not just to our mental health, but our physical health and predictions of longevity. So leaders do create, set a tone of a climate and a culture by what they do. Their own moods, their own emotions rub off. We call it emotional contagion. So it's just one of the focal points in our consulting work and practice of can't change everything in an organization, but I can help facilitate, enhance leadership practices to do things that will make people feel as if they belong, as if they're heard, as if they feel psychologically safe. It goes a long way given all the tremendous stress factors that exist.
Absolutely. And just to close the loop, back to your father's experiences, you know, he found a connection in his orphanage and married that connection. And he found unbelievable support in an organization and became loyal to that organization, right? Like that is a perfect example of what happens when you are in a position to offer that to somebody else and what happens to them and their trajectory, despite all of what they've gone through in their trajectory, right? So as we close out today, if people want to learn more about your work, where can they go?
Yeah, go visit our website, envisialearning.com, envisia.com. You can certainly Google some of my research in a wide variety of academic journals. And Mira, if people want to reach out to me through LinkedIn, connect with me, ask me some questions. I'm always one to try to be supportive and helpful. I love this topic. It's a bit of a mystifying definition of what resilience is. And we'll keep learning new things. What I'm sharing with you today, probably in 5, 10, 15 years, will not only be incorrect, might be completely reversed as well.
Awesome. And I think I've been mispronouncing your company's name. Is it Envisia?
Yeah, typically Envisia is what we call it.
Envisia.
Yeah,
Yeah,
we'll go
that
with
makes
anything.
sense. That makes sense. Here I am saying Envisia.
I kind of
All
like
right.
it. It sounds cute.
Audience, what did you take away? And more importantly, what is the one small change you can implement this week based on what you learned from Ken? I know my one small change is calling his company Envisia instead of Envisia. Anyway, what did you learn? What will you change? What will you implement in 60 to 90 days? Share it with us on LinkedIn at Mira Brancu or Ken Nowack on LinkedIn. That's where we live online. You could also find TalkRadio.nyc on LinkedIn, Twitter, Twitch, Facebook, Instagram, everywhere. In addition to being a live show, we're on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. Please go subscribe to the podcast, leave a review, and share with others to help us increase our visibility, reach, and impact. The stuff we talk about on this show is part of our research-based strategic leadership pathway model that we teach in our Tower Scope Leadership Academy, which is a private coaching and learning community for socially conscious leaders in healthcare, academia, tech, and STEM industries looking to make a greater impact. To learn more and apply, check us out at gotowerscope.com and click on Leadership Academy. Thank you, TalkRadio.nyc, for hosting. I'm Dr. Mira Brancu, the host of your Hard Skills Show. And thank you for joining us today, Dr. Ken Nowack. We loved having you on.
Thank you.
Have a great rest of your day wherever you're tuning in from, everyone. Bye, all.